So recently I made this video on the Bursting Conductor 3 DAC, headphone amp, and preamp. It's a 3-in-1. And in the video I mentioned, look, I got my hands on a few DAC from Asia, namely the SMSL M400, the Topping D90, as well as the Guster X26. And I mentioned in that video, those DACs are very transparent, very detailed, but one of the issues with them is that they can be a bit too sharp. Now the problem is that when I made that comment, I actually only have spent maybe half an hour with each DAC. And now that I've spent quality time with the SMSL M400, I realized I was actually wrong. So today let's talk about the SMSL M400. Hi-Fi Express reached out to me recently and asked, hey Thomas, you want to review our SMSL product? I'm like, hell yeah, for sure, man. I heard a lot of good things about SMSL and I heard they measure really well. So I went on their website, look around, and I said, you know what? The SMSL M400 is a good choice because I have a few DACs in the same price range and a few other that's coming in. So I figure, okay, let's take a look at the SMSL M400. So I asked them, by the way, why should people buy from you? Because there's a lot of companies out there where you can buy an SMSL M400. Now they told me that SMSL actually owns a big share of this website. So you're basically dealing with the manufacturer directly. So that means after-sale support is much more convenient. Next, they have warehouses around the world, in US, in England, as well as Japan. So they can ship directly from the warehouse. So double check with them to see if you can save on customs, because if they're shipping within the country, you can save on customs. So a big thank you to Hi-Fi Express for sending me this unit. Not long ago, Andrew Jones introduced these ELAC speakers, these budget ones, right? The Debut 6.2, the ELAC Unify B5, and then I think those speakers changed the world of budget speakers forever. The expectation of budget speakers' performance has gone up significantly ever since he introduced those speakers. Today, if budget speakers are not at least to a certain level, man, they're not going to survive in today's environment. Now DAC, I think we have reached that point now. It's been a while since I played with budget DAC, and recently I got my hands on a few of them. And when I try them, I'm like, oh my goodness. The expectations for budget DAC will no longer be the same. And I'll be making a few videos, maybe 4 or 5 videos going forward, talking about a few budget. Well, budget is like $800 to $1,000. Each one of them has their own unique strength, but one thing in common is that they can compete with the big boys. They're not too far behind. And today, I'm going to focus on the SMSL M400 first. Some of you might go like, Thomas, well, you're saying that because you never heard $50,000 DAC, so that's why you're so impressed with it. You're right, I should define my frame of reference. Usually, me and my friends, we play with DACs around $3-4 grand. So that's what we're comparing it to. Yes, I do have friends with CD players, well, DAC, around 30-40 grand, which I'm very familiar with because I spend a lot of time listening to those. But for today's video, we're comparing to DACs that are around 3-4 grand. So when I said the SMSL M400 is not too far behind, that's what I'm comparing to. So when I first got these few DACs, I remember putting in my system and I'm going like, guys, you got to listen to this. I messaged my friends. They're like, all right, how much is it? And I'm like, $800. They're like, pass. Come bother me with something more interesting. I kind of had to force them, guys, please, I beg you, check these out. Next thing you know, they called me up and they said, you know, Thomas, you know my $3,000-$4,000 DAC? I'm putting up for sale, man. I'm keeping this instead. You're not getting this DAC back. Now, eventually I might make a video comparing all the DACs I have. One thing I'll say about the SMSL that's different than all the DACs I have is that it is a neutral sounding DAC. So let's talk about how it sounds. So the M400 is very smooth on the top end, and it doesn't exaggerate the highs. You know, some DACs, they have this V curve, so the top end is really boosted up. None of that. So that's why this DAC is good for long listening session. You know, in the past I would like split gear into two categories, analytical or musical. This one leans on the musical side, but yet you still get all the micro details. And that's what's very unique about it. So when you want to relax, when you come home and you don't want to analyze the music, you'll use this DAC and you can just relax. And if you want to go into critical listening, you still hear all the details. This is very important because for some of us, we like that sharpness, but for some of us, we just want it to be, tell it as it is, as opposed to exaggerating it. Now, of course, those of you who follow me, you know I like, the V curve. But having said that, I absolutely can appreciate how neutral it is because I have a few other stories to tell after, okay? The mid-range is bold, it's full body, right? As I said, there's no V curve. So in the mid-range, there is this meat to it. And of course, it's very clear. When it comes to bass, it is solid, it's well controlled, and it digs deep. Soundstage, I find it just okay. Now, where I think you can do better is instrument separation. Now, usually lean sounding gear that I come across, they're great at instrument separation. Now, this one being that it's a bit full body, this is where the other DACs does a little bit better. Not that this one is not good, okay? Be very careful here because for me, it is very good. It's just that if I have to nitpick on something, this is where I would say I wish it did a bit better. So everything I just said, you know what, I can apply to a $500 DAC, right? Good soundstage, detail highs, and blah, 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 blah. So what makes it so amazing? And that's where I think sharing my experience comes in so that you can understand how we come to the conclusion that this is an amazing DAC. So I had a few of my friends help me evaluate it, 3 of them. So I got Mr. Kanta because he used to own a pair of Kanta, that's why I call him Mr. Kanta. Mr. Vintage because he owns a lot of vintage gear. And then for this one, I also have Denise helping me out. Denise, if you have not seen the video of his place, go check it out. He has a very nice system. I remember the first night when I got an email from Mr. Kanta talking about the SMSL M400. The title was something like, "Are you kidding me?" Think about it. This unit has everything: XLR output, coaxial input, optical input, I2S, USB input, DSD, I think 512 support, 32-bit, 768K, Bluetooth LDAC, a color LCD screen, a remote control, and above all, it sounds great. How the hell do you beat a DAC like this? That's why I say, man, these high-end DACs, if they need to stay competitive, they need to step up their game. So after this review, my friend Mr. Vintage will buy this DAC because he likes neutral sounding gear. That's his thing. Now, Denise already owned this DAC actually, and he told me he actually prefers this DAC over this $4,000 DAC that he had, and that's today's pricing. I'm not going to mention which one is it, okay? And the main strength for him, he said, there are a few, right? I'm just going to focus on one. He said that it sounds very natural, and I'm like, oh God, natural. I hate that word. What do you mean by natural? Give me the specifics. So you see, he has friends who actually record music. So he listens to them in live events, and he listens to them at home. And he said that this SMSL reproduced the music that he heard live closer to the real thing than the other DAC that he had. For those of you who have not seen this video, he has a pair of Tyler speakers and a pair of Martin Logan. He said that the DAC elevated his Tyler speakers so much that he actually sold his Martin Logan. I'm like, don't you like lose soundstage? Because electrostatic speakers, one of the strengths is soundstage. He said, no, it's fine. And he said with the Tyler in the past, he cannot listen without subwoofer, but because there's good bass with this SMSL, he can actually listen even without subwoofer. The only thing he probably need to do is probably get a super tweeter for it because the top end is a bit rolled off with the Tyler. And given the SMSL is a neutral DAC, whatever you have will sound exactly the way it's meant to be. Now, as I mentioned, once again, this is a neutral sounding DAC, okay? So for those of you who want that boosted top end, this is not it. It will reveal exactly what your system is, okay? I'm going to tell you another story. How's that? Recently, I got my hand on this Yamaha AS2200. Plug it in, I'm like, oh, this sounds so smooth. I messaged Sean at Zero Fidelity, and he told me, no, it's not smooth. It's a bit bumped up, the mids and the highs actually. I'm like, no, sounds pretty smooth to me. Until I changed to the SMSL M400. That's where I go, oh, okay, I get what you mean. Because the SMSL M400 is neutral, it will show you exactly what the downstream is without coloring it. You see, I was listening to it with my Exasound E28, and that smooths things out. And that's why I have no problem listening to full house speakers, cavs, and monitor audio in my home, because those are known to be very bright speakers, but at my place it sounds fine. One of the reasons is because I use very smooth sounding amps, and also the fact that my DAC is very smooth sounding. So that got me thinking. That's why Mr. Vintage told me I should actually get the SMSL to use as a reference gear, because when I evaluate gear, it doesn't color the sound, the SMSL, so I can actually hear the gear for what it is, like everything downstream. So when it comes to what kind of music is it good for, it's good for 90% of the music out there. There's only one kind of music where it might be not a good match, and that's rock music. And I said this because I had a long chat with Mr. Vintage. He's really into rock music like Led Zeppelin, Rush, and he said the problem is that this DAC is polite, is smooth, is musical, great for long listening session, but when you listen to rock music, you want it to distort, you want it to be rough, you want to hear, you want it to be aggressive, you want to hear people smashing their guitars, and this DAC can be a little bit too polite for that. So please keep that in mind. Next, one thing I noticed is that I find it sounded better with USB over optical. Don't know why. I did try to use it as a preamp actually, and I was expecting it not to do too well. From my experience, it's always good to have a preamp in the middle and instead of plugging the DAC directly to the power amp. But I did try it actually, and I was actually surprised that it did work okay. I had it plugged to the XTZ. If you have it plugged to the XTZ power amp directly, the rolled-off nature of the XTZ will really show up in this setup. As I said, because the SMSL is very neutral. Whatever the characteristic of the amp that you plug it to, it will show up. When I plug it to my Moon W5.3, I have this warm sounding presentation, and when I had it plugged to my Classe D200, it was more of a leaner presentation. What surprised me the most was that it sounded actually better than when I connected my Mcintosh D150 to the Moon. I don't know what its output impedance is, but I was actually a little bit surprised because I was expecting it not to do too well, but it was okay. Now, of course, having a 2 preamp added into the system does sound better. I had it connected to my Modrite LS100 2 preamp. I had it connected to the Freya, and with the Modrite LS100, it sounded significantly better. With the Freya, it sounded a little bit better. So let's wrap it up at this point. Now, if you have decided to go for a neutral sounding DAC, that's your direction, you've decided, and you have a choice to come buy this $300, $500 DAC, I say screw it, man. Just eat more instant noodles, save up, and get this DAC. And the reason is because once you get this DAC, you no longer need to upgrade unless you're thinking to skip to the 4,000, 6,000 area. Your system, your bottleneck will no longer be the DAC. Okay, but it's very important. This has to be your taste, right? If you like something with a bit more color, then of course you look at the other DACs that I'll talk in the future. But if you wanted a neutral DAC, this is what you get. Now, some of you who have bought better DACs might go like, but Thomas, you know, I tried the other DACs that you said, I don't hear a big difference in my system. Yeah, it's possible. Because maybe, let's say this DAC can give this much bass and your speaker can only give this much bass, adding better DAC doesn't do much, right? But it will not be your bottleneck as you upgrade the rest of your system. So that's why I said, wow, we reached the point where these DACs that I get are called game changer, meaning that it has raised the bar, the overall bar, so high that high-end DACs have to also improve to keep up. I always believe you get what you pay for, okay? But I also believe that technology improves, and there's always transition period. Eventually, high-end DACs will also improve to the point where the gap will show up a lot more again. But at this point, I think that the budget DACs are catching up so much that now it's time for the high-end DACs to move higher up. Now, some of you might go like, Thomas, but I heard this other DAC is better than, let's say, Soundstage. And the way I see it is that it really doesn't matter, because think of this line as excellent or good, just good, okay? Everything that this DAC does is beyond that line already. So it kind of doesn't matter anymore, because if you think about it, if you make 13 bucks an hour, you get a raise to 14 bucks an hour, yeah, it makes a difference, okay? But if you make $50,000 an hour and you get a raise to $50,000 and $5, big whoop. Sure, it is a bit better, but big whoop. And that's why I said, don't focus on little things like, oh, the bass is a bit better and that, the whatever is a bit better than this DAC. Focus on the overall presentation. Are you looking for a more neutral sounding DAC? Are you looking for a musical DAC? If that's the case, then this is something that you should put on your top 3 audition list. All right, so I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, the reason I bought this DAC in the first place was simply because it supported the NQA. That was the main reason I bought it, the first thing. Second thing is the numbers in the parameters were really good. I mean, like, very good. And that made me think that, okay, maybe there's something other than numbers in this stack. And after a few months with it, I realized the way it played had a much better presentation in terms of naturalness, which it's easy to describe. I mean, if you ever went to a live concert or heard someone play right beside you, let's say a guitar or piano, things like that. I have a CD of a friend who I listened to live, and that's what I was trying to reach, something that could make me feel like I was there. And this DAC goes really in that direction. And the only thing I can think of that I've tried in my sound system that is better, I would say maybe 20%, 25%. That's a lot, but it was still 15 grand for that DAC compared to this. So it's 15 times more to get maybe, even if you say 50%, it's still a bargain compared to those big boys. But in general, what we think of is that if it's cheap, then it plays cheap. Well, in the past, it was that. If you look back maybe 10, 15 years ago, if you bought a unit, a piece of gear that was at $800 or $1,000, well, you were in the entry level, mid-level type of sound system. But today, everything's changing, and this product, well, simply blew me away. I made some changes in my sound system because of this DAC, and made me save a bit of money at the same time. And my objective goal was that to get as close as possible as a rated A audiophile sound system, but at the cheapest level, the best value you can get for your money at the end of the of it all. So that's why this DAC completed this sound system. It has everything I need, mostly the connections, which the Oppo will get upgraded soon for the i2 Square. If you haven't heard of this, check on websites. You can get your Oppo 103, even the later ones, with the modifications that you can connect with the new DACs. So you get a very good transport. and you can play with any DAC that you choose. And this one, well, it excelled in everything that I exactly needed. What can I say more than, well, I bought it and I keep it.
Eyes glow like two fires, movement so graceful. Wildcat in the jungle with dangerous claws. Movement she anticipates, a sight set on her prey. Like stars in the darkest night, crystallize, fascinate. If you wanna stay alive, if you don't wanna be her prey, don't stand in her way. Run, run, run away. Crystallize, 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 watching her prey. Crystallize, 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 fascinate. Eyes glow like two fires, movement so graceful. Wildcat in the jungle with dangerous claws. Movement she anticipates, a sight set on her prey. Like stars in the darkest night, crystallize, fascinate. If you wanna stay alive, if you don't wanna be her prey, don't stand in her way. Run, run, run away. Crystallize, 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 watching her prey. Crystallize, 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 fascinate.